everybody, to Radicalized, where truth survives, and we always got your back. You guys missed the real show where Jim was able to play Stairway to Heaven on his face because Hi-Fi and I were still putting links in the rundown, and it was hilarious. Glad to have you back with us, Jim. Nice to see you, Hi-Fi.
I am not going to do it. Okay.
Come for the information, stay for the Jimphony. It's wonderful.
The Jimphony is very well done.
The Jimphony.
Seriously, we all know that we have an election 15 days from now. Things are getting very strange, and as we promised that they would, unfortunately, but we are here to bring you some really important information and an incredible show. You guys all know that democracy is on the ballot November 8th. I know y'all already voted. Make sure 10 of your friends do. Just to get a little housekeeping out of the way, just a reminder, the gentlemen that I produce this show with are disinformation investigators. We expose the liars and the cheats and the schemers who are trying to destroy democracies globally. And we just cannot even begin to tell you how excited we are that Jason Stanley is going to be joining us. And the fact that he's going to be on our show is very, very meaningful to all of us. He, of course, is the author of How Fascism Works. If you have not bought it, you have not read it, download it right now. It's a quick read, and you will learn everything you need to learn and everything you need to know in order to be a better warrior in this fight. So we are grateful to Jason. All right, let's just jump right into Front Loaded, guys.
Front Loaded.
I coordinated with Marty. We both read the Trump subpoena from the January 6th committee. I called it The Evil That Men Do because I do love to include Shakespeare in as many of my threads as possible. But I think that what's really important, there's a bunch of very important things. I'm sure the gentleman will agree with me. The desperation with which Trump and his goons tried to stay in power shows that Putin really needed this win. I also believe that Trump has always acted like a mob boss. And so the fact that I've known for years that they couldn't catch that smoking gun or get that smoking gun because he doesn't email, he doesn't text. Well, apparently there may be some signal action going on because all throughout the subpoena was all electronic communications and signal. So apparently when they were going after the Oath Keepers and the other militia goons, they found some signal chats of interest. But the thing I wanted to bring up with the gentleman was I was very pleased with the list at the end of the communications that they wanted on the very back here, because it opened with Roger Stone of Guccifer 2 fame, Stephen Bannon of, Build the Wall grift and everything else that he's been involved with. Of course, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. We don't really know who he is. This show exposes his fuckery big time.
Yeah, arrest Mike Flynn.
Yeah, sorry. Right. Of course. We're going to say it at least 5 other times. Let me just get down the list. Jeffrey Clark, John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chisbra, Boris Epstein, Christina Bobsky, as Jim would say, Cleta Mitchell, or Patrick Byrne. That's a really good, solid list.
Cleta's CNP. It's got the whole. That's pretty good. The one name that is absent from all of these lists and drives me fucking crazy is Eric Prince, and he's really, really good at the lawfare.
Yeah, he is
the basic reason. He sued The Intercept and some reporters and all kinds.
Yeah.
But he's the actual, Putin ally, Knight of Malta, that trains all these people.
Well, I look forward to seeing where this all goes because my next item here.
Hellscape will have a little bit more to say.
Let me just go in order of what I've mapped out in my mind. 15 more days until the worst of the misogynistic gutter trolling goes on hiatus, at least briefly, while they seek out their next contracts. That's important to me because the escalation of vitriol, the escalation of bullying from the operatives is just something that is not normal. It's normal for what we're going through right now, and we saw this sort of this type of incitement toward vitriol, violence, stochastic terrorism in 2016. Clearly, the contracts will have to be renewed after the 8th. Just know this
It depends, right? I mean, like Pizzagate, when really got started right after the election, right? Before that, it was really only started getting labeled Pizzagate after that. Went on for fucking months after. So we'll see. I think this is a little different because Putin is not hidden this time, right? And that's a remarkable thing to me. I mean, it's the same exact set of people doing the exact same thing, except this time Putin's now in the open, and his fifth column is all now like, we love Putin and we hate Ukraine, and Putin's actually over there killing babies in Ukraine and bombing our friends, the friends of this show. So I think it's a little different. I think these are all dead enders at this point, and I think just like after the 2020 election, when it was all big lie all the time in order to try and disrupt the results. We ain't seen nothing yet.
Well, I agree with you. I just think that plenty of their candidates are actually going to lose. So that's all I'm saying is some of them who are running ops on people will lose, and maybe they'll have contracts that take a different angle. But right now, it's a emotional, psychological bloodbath out there, and just know that it's not real and it's not normal.
It's not going to get better. If Musk gets a hold of it, it's not going to get better. That's for sure.
No, and there will be no reason to, and it'll be sad because the small percentage left of what's good of the public square will be gone. So that is very true.
We can always make a new public square,
Oh, I know. So listen, this is very important to me because I will forever treasure our interview with our guest from last week, David Pepper. I was so invigorated from that because he gave such specifics of things that we could do, and he's just so incredible. So I wanted just to mention a tweet that he put out yesterday, which I think will strike a chord with you guys. Putin is cheering for McCarthy to be speaker and Vance to be senator. Think about that. When Jim talks about this stuff being out in the open, what could be more overt than that?
Wait, did he? Like by name or something?
Yeah. Russian state media turned to Rumble to get out their word. Thiel and Vance have given a voice to Putin's propaganda through Rumble. That's a Politico story.
I mean, through Rumble.
Rumble.
I
mean, who did Rumble?
If you want to know about Rumble, I've been following that shit from get.
Sorry,
so
it's Peter Thiel's twin of YouTube, right? Like Patrick Burns said this in the Search for Q documentary, that they set up twins of the real world that are, malevolent versions of the same thing.
Right.
And that's what Truth Social is, just malevolent Twitter. Rumble is just malevolent. Well, Parler's got 40,000 people in Yay now, so great. But it used to be.
Hey,
right?
40,000 people is still 40,000 people.
Yeah,
explain yourselves.
And now Truth Social and Rumble are on the same ad platform. It's just the same network now, right? And then Telegram, on top of that, and it is just mirror of the real world, and absolutely that is 100% pro Putin propaganda all the time on Rumble, all of it.
The problem with this game is all of their digital pieces, all the things they use for their propaganda and their brainwashing and blah, 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 blah. Almost all of them have Peter Thiel smeared all over it.
Of course.
Ew.
Well, I'm glad it's out in the open because as Brent Allpress has always told me, the overt criminal acts that are occurring will ultimately catch up with them. And I have to believe that. I can't, to not believe that is to give up, and that is not in my DNA.
Well, the only problem with that statement is that it assumes that there is a system in place to enforce a rule of law,
right?
And
which goes back to 15 literally days,
what they're trying to dismantle. So the whole game is not did they commit crimes? Is there going to be a criminal justice system in place to punish them for it? That's the game.
Thank you.
And remember, in Rachel Maddow's Ultra podcast, she talks about the people walked who did this. They seem to forget. I think it's time to make an example, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. A brief note of positivity, because what I said is really important. We went through this before, and Rachel's podcast is amazing. We went through this before in the 30s. There was a very, very significant pro-Hitler, pro-Nazi movement in the United States. The leading entertainer in the United States was a guy named Father Coughlin, who was a Nazi. He was an anti-Semite. He was pro-Hitler. He wanted us to stay out of Europe, and he wanted Jews to die. He was totally fine with that. And he was setting up an actual armed paramilitary group that had cells all across the nation and had a credible threat to overthrow the government of the United States. And guess what the press did? Nothing. The New York Times just called them crackpots. They said, these right-wing crackpots, nothing would ever happen. In the meantime, they've got munitions, they've got contacts inside of armories. They are not fucking around at all. But guess what happened? Bunch of anti-fascists, real ones, not Antifa, fake.
The Paul Mason kind.
The real kind.
Mason kind of
and got in there, figured out what they were doing, infiltrated and exposed it, and made it impossible for either the Justice Department or the press or the Congress to ignore it. And guess what? There were congressional hearings, and the leader of it got put behind bars for seditious conspiracy, if that rings familiar. And it happened because of people, because of us. I'm not saying we're them, but I'm saying that people like us are the ones who broke that plot down.
Kind of smells
and by
like
us, I mean the people watching this. Because if you're watching this, if you've managed to get through the gauntlet, you're a warrior yourself.
I do want to say that the New York Times has a history of the normalization creep. I will be quoting Jason Stanley throughout all of this. In the 1920s, they were writing about how Hitler was just misunderstood and just using propaganda to bait the masses. Well, that was an epic fail. So thank you for that. The other thing that I wanted to mention, last item and front loaded, is that for whatever reason, the Trump subpoena on the January 6th committee's website was down for days. It's back up this morning. I don't know when it came back up, but the link to it was down. So all the news reports that linked to it didn't have it either. All my friends, I know, right? All my friends immediately supplied their own links. I had already downloaded it. So if anybody sees it go down again, it'll be on my timeline. By the time this airs, there will be 14 more days, and we will supply you with as much good information and good vibrations as possible as we plow onward to decide if we are going to vote to be a democracy on November 8th. All right. Word phrase of the week. This is going to be excellent.
I'm going to get yelled at. Word phrase of the week this week is, ready? Tanky. What is a tanky, you might ask? A tanky is a label. Notice I dropped the word pejorative. Is a label for leftists, particularly Stalinists, Marxist-Leninists, Maoists. I mean, anyone who says it's the leaders of the left movement in the past who murdered millions of people for the good of humanity are okay by me.
Yeah.
That's a tanky.
I first heard of the word when Paul Mason was on our show, and I have unfortunately seen the attempts to destroy the Democratic Party from extreme left operatives that don't have anything to do with democracy as we know it. So it's unfortunate because if I'm seeing it up close, it must be mirrored throughout the country. And again, Jim, I point to the Ionov indictment, which showed Kremlin cutouts working directly with the FSB have been financing far left groups in America for years. This one guy was doing it for a decade. Who else is doing it? I don't know, but it's certainly making it difficult to maintain the center, and the Democrats as we know it who have believed that we come together in the center for community and to, work things out among us are being marginalized as far right extremists, and it's just a false narrative, and it actually smells a lot like borscht.
I mean, I'm gonna be less kind. Tankies are people who, generally speaking, are unwitting traitors to the country.
Yeah.
They have been, frankly, brainwashed into an ideology that is nihilistic, that is no different than the alt-right. It's just the mirror image of it. It's what I've talked about many times, whether it's the red-brown alliance or the horseshoe theory or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It is just wrapping around of nihilism on the right and on the left, right? So the right wing will call us libtards, and the left wing will call us shit libs. Same thing. It just means you care about people. You have empathy. You want justice and equality. What kind of shit lib are you? Like you're out here trying to break down society. You think your anarchist and utopian worldview is really the answer to anything? No, it's not. It's just an excuse for you to act out your adolescent narcissistic fantasies. So wake up, guys. We have a genocidal dictator across the world who is winning.
Yeah. Well, so and they're helping.
Help him. You have picked a side.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, 100%. And it's a drag because these aren't the stories that we want to be telling, but this is our reality. And so if you're working on the side of a genocidal maniac, then I don't know what to tell you.
And remember, working on the side of a genocidal maniac is also evidenced by the divide and conquer strategy, in which they try to argue things like, I'm a leftist, you're a liberal. Well, I mean, I can sit down and argue Karl Marx any day of the week. And actually, I think Kropotkin's A Triumph of Bread is a much better text if you want to understand the ideology. But right now is not the time, kids.
I have seen up close and been gathering evidence that just as people on the right have been psyoped through QAnon, people on the left are on the extreme left under undue influence as well, is what I'm trying to say. And that's a bit shit because they're not going to like authoritarianism, which is, come into a community near you if you don't wake up and.
Right. You cannot be an anti-fascist and be a Putin apologist. You don't get to do that. You don't get to be Antifa and pretend to be against fascism while you simp and shill for Vladimir Putin. You can't do it. It doesn't compute. So all you Antifers out there who are running ops on people who are trying to expose what's going on, we know who you are. You're a tanky, whether you're witting or not. Doesn't matter. Knock it off.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, guys, for always putting to words the things that I'm trying to articulate fiercely. Yeah, all right. Why it matters. Yo.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why high fidelity?
First story this week. Report, TikTok bad at calling U.S. election misinformation.
No way.
This was, it's a surprise. They're not just trying to take ad money, no. But anyway, what happened was Global Witness and New York University tested out blatant disinformation, wrong dates, undermining the election system, voting machines, blah, blah, blah. But they, what's funny is they did kind of soft walk this. Facebook and YouTube were in there too. They tried to say, they did better, right? Except what they mean by better in the paper is Facebook caught 7 out of 20 of the disinformation ads.
That's
and a reminder that Facebook just cut their disinformation team.
Yeah, right before the
They're
midterms.
doing so well. They're up to 35% now. Imagine coming home with a fucking test and being like, "Ma, I got a 35 on this. I don't want to go to school anymore." And mom going, "Oh, that's a good idea." That's what's going on here. It's ridiculous. These companies don't give a shit about this stuff. And what's
And
funny
funny you
is
say that.
they're, to be fair to YouTube, they did apparently catch the ads, but at the same time, YouTube has a multi-billion-dollar relationship with Epoch Times, and every single time I even watch a scientific video, I have to watch some Falun Gong cult member like bullshit me about the topic of the day. And so you YouTube, you're not like, you do have
You're not subtle.
So
But what I do want to point out in this article right here is this part. In Myanmar, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Brazil, just a reminder for all our listeners that they failed miserably. So they're playing kind of by the rules, pretending to play by the rules here in the United States, but overseas they're an engine for havoc.
Yeah. So just because Jim brought up Epoch Times, I don't read them. They're propaganda trash and pro-Trump and pro all this crap. But I did read one particular article, and what they did, and I just want to warn people about this, is they did a Soviet era technique called parasitizing, where the story seems to be on the level, and then 2/3 of the way in comes the frickin' disinformation bomb. Please note that that is free because you are the product, and it's your mind they're trying to hack, and they're using techniques that we expose here on this show. So be on the lookout for it. Parasitizing is something very important to be aware of.
All disinformation has a component of truth, right? It has to. The more completely made up it is, the more dangerous it gets. Because, as Voltaire said, they can make you believe absurdities. They can make you commit atrocities.
All I know is that in Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, he does a big section on conspiracy theories and why they are necessary for the fascist creep. So hopefully we'll be able to ask him about that.
I mean, I'd love to hear his answer. Mine is very simple, which is, in order to cover up a real conspiracy, you need other conspiracy theories to get people off the track, right? Is that really that simple?
It's just insane. Okay. Yeah. All right. Wow. All right. So let's get, what do we got next? Hi-Fi.
Next, we got hide and go thief. What do I mean by that? Well, here you go. U.S. businesses propose hiding trade data used to trace abuse. Basically, the gist of this story is a bunch of corporate CEOs are advising Customs and Border Protection to hide data that relates to corporate malfeasance overseas, i.e. the Uyghurs in China, sweatshops, things like that. Why it matters is if you're going to hold someone accountable for their behavior, you need to know what their behavior is. By doing this, we don't know what their behavior is.
By hiding the trace data.
I mean, it's like the tobacco industry saying, "Oh, all that health data that we gathered over decades on our own customers who were dying from our products. We don't want you to have that data because something, blah, blah, blah,
blah, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
That's exactly what we want.
Capitalism needs guardrails, yo.
Yeah.
Guardrails.
Well, it needs guardrails and it needs accountability. And speaking of accountability, that brings us to our third story this week. And that story is that the Russian role in the Burkina Faso crisis is now coming under scrutiny. And
yes,
that's
you've been talking about this for a year, Hi-Fi.
Thank you. It's about time it paid off. But this is, geopolitics that's at its worst. Within hours, Wagner was in there going, "Hey, good job, guys. We're right behind you." If you look at Wagner in Sudan, if you look, I mean, all over Africa, you see the fingerprints of Eric Prince and Wagner, right? We have Eric Prince violating sanctions in Libya with Hiftar. It just goes on and on and on with these people. When's it going to stop? Anyway,
well,
that's why it matters this week.
I'm glad that you followed up on that.
Eric Prince on video with Nigel Farage having a beer with Nigel Farage, saying he got an offer from Vladimir Putin to create a private military company, but instead he let Wagner take it.
Oh, he let. I wonder, did he get any consulting fees of any kind? Anybody check his bank account?
Hold on.
Eric Prince and Wagner are totally tied up with.
But what I find interesting about Eric Prince is what's a few back channel beers with like Russian operatives? Like that's like his thing. You know what I'm saying? Like he just likes having beers, with the Russians, to.
Well, I would like to express my feelings with Jim's stuffed animal. Jim, could you please show us your stuffed animal? Here are my feelings on this.
He says ironically, yeah,
this is
it's
fine.
all just
it's
fine.
Not really fine.
It's not really fine. It's not fine.
I'm sorry. I'm fine.
Back to what we were just saying about, before we move on, back to what we were just saying about conspiracy theories. I had to pull up how fascism works. And of course, Jason Stanley cites Hannah Arendt, who he claims, and we all agree, perhaps the 20th century's greatest theorist of totalitarianism. She gave clear warnings of the importance of conspiracy theories in anti-democratic politics. And basically what he says is because the audience for conspiracy theories readily discount their own experience, it is often unimportant that the conspiracy theories are demonstrably false. So I can't wait to probe that further. All right. I think there's no point in not moving right on to Hellscape.
Jim Stewartson's Hellscape. Oh, fuck.
So my friend Dave strikes again.
Hi, Dave.
This is a big deal. And I didn't realize this, and I probably should have. But Dana Rohrabacher is an important fellow. He was basically Putin's direct channel to Congress, right? Mm-hmm. Everything he did was benefited Putin. Mm-hmm. Like that was the whole point of his career, apparently. And it turns out Dana Rohrabacher helped Elon Musk infiltrate the space program. Mm-hmm. That it was Dana Rohrabacher who said, "Oh, we have to privatize space," right? He was the one who pushed that. When it doesn't really make any sense at all to me. NASA was doing fine. This was Putin's congressman pushing for this. And then Elon Musk taking advantage of it. And this went on for 2 decades, which I didn't know before. And to me, this is really important and explains why Elon Musk is literally negotiating for Putin in between propagandizing for Putin. He's trying to feel out, exactly how far he can push the American people for Putin. With his 110 million Twitter followers, right?
Some of whom I'm sure are real.
Like 15, 16, maybe.
Sadly, they're almost all real, right? Mm-hmm. The whole bot thing is mainly bullshit. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So let's just back up a little bit and talk about Rohrabacher and his people. So Rohrabacher had in his office as chief of staff a guy named Paul Behrens. Paul Behrens was a Knight of Malta. The Knights of Malta are a Catholic extremist branch that I've talked about quite a bit. They have only 13,000 members, but they have literal nation-state-like relationships with 100 countries, and They have recently been sort of, emasculated by the Pope, thank goodness. But for many, many decades, they've been, doing the work of fascists.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this guy, Paul Behrens, chief of staff for this guy, Dana Rohrabacher, was in Rohrabacher's office in 1991 when a young chap named Eric Prince interned there.
Yeah, I know.
Eric Prince interned in Rohrabacher's office, and then the next year converted to Catholicism and became a Knight of Malta, which is weird because his parents were Dominionists, right? They all came from the CNP and that whole angle. The Schlafly and whatnot are also, Schlafly was a Dame of Malta.
Can I remind everyone that his sister is Betsy DeVos of the Michigan DeVosses?
Right, who was the Secretary of Education, tried to destroy education. Also, in charge of Amway, which is a dangerous MLM cult. That's been hurting people for a long time. So anyway, Eric Prince, after becoming a Knight of Malta, started Blackwater. And Blackwater had numerous other Knights of Malta in it. And it named its vehicles Templar 14. And those were the vehicles that went around and shot Muslims as often as they could. And that was why Blackwater got in trouble. And ultimately, Eric Prince had to change its name like 4 or 5 times. It doesn't really matter. I think it's Academy now. It's just a bunch of neo-Nazis who want to murder Muslims. That's what it's for. So anyway, without going into all of that, the man that he did that with was Mike Flynn. Mike Flynn ran PSYOP, Special Operations and Intelligence in Afghanistan and Iraq for Stanley McChrystal. And Eric Prince was his contractor. Turns out that Elon Musk, Rohrabacher, have been basically pumping each other's careers for 20 years. Now, weird thing that happened in December of 2020, right before the insurrection, Paul Behrens had a sudden fall. Oh no!
Weird fall.
A weird fall near his home. Oh geez, right before Eric Prince is. According to the son of the head of the Oath Keepers, Eric Prince was running the insurrection with Mike Flynn and would have been in charge or, had a major role in the fascist state afterwards. Behrens been rat fucking and running operations for decades. And now look at this. This is 2014. This is young Elon Musk just running around rich people's houses, simping for Putin's congressman, the guy who got him the ability to get contracts and start to infiltrate the space program. And now Elon Musk is doing everything in his power, including fucking with the Ukrainians' communication systems to benefit Putin. Why is this okay? Why is the guy who's sending literal rocket ships into space, why is it okay that he's got these obvious connections to our number one geopolitical enemy who is currently committing atrocities? And why is it that Dave, and thank God for Dave, has to dig this up, right? And now let's just bring it a little closer to home. I'm not going to get too into it, but a little closer to home. This guy who's currently running around hurting people that we know is buddies with Rohrabacher. This is him doing the white power sign in front of the Ecuadorian embassy in London to meet Putin asset Julian Assange. How much Putin can you get? You got Nazi Putin. What is going on here? Why is anybody giving this guy the time of day? It's amazing. If you're giving that guy who's standing next to Dana Rohrabacher the time of day, you are a moron or an op.
I have something to say.
I'm not done yet. You can
I got
say
one
something in a
line.
minute.
No, I got one line. The last time
Good.
I checked Chuck Johnson's LinkedIn, it said he worked for Peter Thiel's Anduril. That's all I had to add. Please go on.
Also, apparently, has a genetics deal with Jack Dorsey, which sounds great, right? Doesn't that sound awesome?
That reeks of
Okay.
eugenics.
Yeah, great. Anyway, if you haven't seen him, I did these little sort of secret phone calls where I kind of explained, or they explained why Musk was acting this way, and I kind of nailed it. He is compromised so hard. His incredible genius and his streak of brilliance. He's, as Dave Troy said, he's a made man. He can't fail. He can't fail. They won't let him.
Well,
The thing about transnational organized crime is that it's transnational, it's organized, and it's crime.
So look, I went through that story, and that was not the story I expected, but it ties so much of this together, right? Right, like, and people have been calling us conspiracy theorists and blue and on and all this, guys. It's right in your face. It's right there. You can't hide from it anymore. What are you going to do? Are you going to admit that you were wrong, or are you going to just keep doing what you're doing? Because in the face of blatant evidence to the contrary, what that means is that you're a cult member. It means if you're acting in a way that is based on an alternate reality, you've been brainwashed. So if there's any remaining part of your conscience, that's still in the surface, seek that out. Seek that last refuge of humanity that you might have saved for yourself, and walk out.
We are so very excited to introduce our audience to Jason Stanley. Of course, he's a philosophy professor and author of How Fascism Works, his latest book, The Politics of Language. Professor Stanley's a muse of mine, and this lurch toward fascism in our country is personal for him. Not only does he have family members who were directly affected and directly perished in the Holocaust, but he also has a very keen understanding of how race is weaponized during fascist grabs. And I'd love to bring Jason in and let him give us a synopsis about himself, and let's get right in. Jason, please give our viewers just one or two lines they already know about you. I quote you every single week on this show. Your work is incredibly important and inspiring to us. And give us a synopsis, give us a quick bit about Poland, and then we're going to jump right in.
So I work on propaganda. I'm a philosopher of language and social and political philosopher. I work on propaganda and ideology. I've been working on anti-democratic ideologies for at least a decade. Primary among them, fascism, which I think has been under-theorized on the hopes people sort of imagine it as something that only occurs in Central Europe at a particular, Germany and Italy and Southern Europe at a particular time in the 20th century. Disregarding its roots, as someone like Sarah Churchwell has demonstrated, and my colleague Jim Whitman, its roots in America, in the United States, in our versions of white nationalism. Both of my parents are survivors of the European Holocaust when they were children. My father came here in 1939, and my mother came here when she was 8 in 1948. She lived through the war, and she worked in the American criminal justice system as a court stenographer for 44 years in criminal court in Syracuse and Manhattan. She was in 100 Center Street during the Central Park 5 case, and she always informed me about the connection between American racism and what she experienced as a child.
And what were you just doing in Poland before we jump into your teachings?
My teachings. The
I'm such a nerd. I'm so nervous. I'm gonna have more coffee.
So, I was in Poland to give. I was the main speaker, or one of the main speakers at the city of Poznan's cultural festival and giving, and I was brought there by a bunch of different organizations, uh, including my press there, who's translated my book, Critica Polityczna, with a very important voice for democracy in Poland, and has been for 20 years. So I gave a talk in Poznan, and then I had a debate with the founder of Critica Polityczna, Slavik Sikorsky, in Warsaw, and did had a lot of meetings with journalists, academics, and other sort of civil society leaders, trying to figure out the situation in Poland with their far-right ruling party, PiS.
Right. And I know you have been documenting this fascist lurch that's going on currently. And obviously, your book, How Fascism Works, is incredibly vital. And what's amazing is that you wrote it a few years ago, and every word of it is just so critical to what's happening now. Can we just start a little bit there about some of the main things? Our viewers are global, and what are some of the main things that we can tell them about what we're seeing right now?
Good. So everywhere you see this kind of corruption of the notion of corruption, corrupt parties running as anti-corruption parties. That's, for example, a very common theme that exists in every country where Viktor Orban is running against corruption, by which he means, of course, the wrong people are in charge, and enriching himself and his family. That's something you saw in the United States as well, where Donald Trump, of all people, I'm from New York City, so we kind of knew about him. I'm not from New York City. I just say that. I'm actually from Syracuse. I've lived in New York. and I slipped up there. I usually people now are shocked to find out that I'm not from Brooklyn. No, I'm from Syracuse, New York. Everybody in New York State knows.
I was born in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's what I used to say, but I made it up. I never used to. I mean, but my mother came to Brooklyn, Brownsville, in 1948. So what we're seeing is a classic fascist grouping in many countries. What do I mean by a fascist grouping? What I mean is a kind of corrupt party or leader telling the Christian conservatives, the evangelicals in the country, that he will get their agenda done for them, telling the big business interests, especially the petrocarbon industry, that he will make sure that no climate change legislation happens. We're finding a very typical and standard, back to Nazi Germany, link up against labor movements, where the corrupt leader or party is saying to businesses, "We'll take care of your labor union problem. We'll make sure you can keep on polluting the environment, exploiting your workers," and then telling the evangelicals, the LGBT community is a dire threat to your children. Then we're seeing in the United States, we're seeing increased anti-Semitism, which is predictable. We've been having many years of dogma-sowing anti-Semitism. So this fascist grouping of religious nationalists, together with big business, behind an autocratic leader who's representing democracy's liberties as an existential threat. So attacks on abortion. I just came from Poland, as Heidi mentioned, where the curtailing of women's rights is sort of central there. They have their laws about religious liberty, misuse of religious liberty talk, where a pharmacist can deny birth control, selling birth control to women. Abortion is totally illegal. The women in Poland had enormous marches against this, but it has not changed. So what women's freedoms like the pro-choice is a large freedom. Fascism seeks to take out freedoms. If you can deny women the various freedoms, then you can take out half the freedoms of half the population immediately. So the goal of fascist politics. Well, what fascist politics does is it represents democracy's freedoms as threats.
Yes.
So that's what we're seeing across the globe. We're seeing this fascist grouping where religious nationalists who aren't themselves fascists support fascist leaders. You have a melding, like with Michael Flynn being the most obvious example in the United States. Michael Flynn gives a mixture of a fascist rally and people are being baptized during it. So it's this idea that the enemy, like the opposition, Michael Flynn, fascists always call the liberals communists. So anyone who's not a fascist is a communist. So that kind of vocabulary very present in Brazil. People in Brazil avoided that because it was associated with a military dictatorship, but it came back in like 2013, 2014 during the bus strikes against Dilma. Well, that ended up in Dilma's impeachment. And so that rhetoric where all of your opponents are communists, democracy's freedoms are an existential threat. You appeal to the billionaire class by saying, we're going to cut your taxes, we're going to deliver, we're going to make sure regulations don't apply to you, we're going to take care of the labor movement, so you don't need to worry about that. That was why big business got behind the Nazis.
Yeah.
And so that's and what you actually deliver for people is you deliver on the Christian evangelical or Hindu nationalist agenda, or Jewish ethno-nationalism in Israel. You deliver on those agendas, and then otherwise, what you give to the people is just the suffering of their enemies. And behind this, everywhere you have great replacement theory thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be replaced, whether it's the whites are going to be replaced by non-whites, the Christians are going to be replaced by Muslims, or the women are going to be replaced by trans women. It's great replacement theory thinking.
Can I just ask you to draw a little bit of parallel between what happened in Weimar in the 20s and obviously later in the 30s, and what I'm seeing is an extremely disturbing parallel between Weimar and the United States, right? Including the stab in the back theory, right? That's all of that stuff is coming back now. And, I've written a bunch of pieces that basically say we're being marched step by step in exactly the same way that Weimar was radicalized, infiltrated, and ultimately turned into the Nazi war machine.
Yeah. So down to now, American fascism has not necessarily been as imperialist as German fascism. So German fascism was imperialist. The American fascist movements of the interwar period were actually isolationist. So I wouldn't expect an exact parallel. Same, British fascism was about sealing the borders. Britain for the British. Of course, immigration has always been. You read Mein Kampf. As I often do, you read Mein Kampf. It's all about immigration.
Yeah,
it's all about Vienna is filled with foreigners, Jews, and more Jews. The persistent theme is immigration, and of course, Hitler is affected by Madison Grant's book, *The Passing of the Great Race*, which is an American book about published 1916, I believe. Saying that the white Europeans are under existential threat here. So,
Can we point out that Mein Kampf was written while Hitler was in jail for
Yeah.
the beer hall putsch?
exactly.
He got a year in comfy jail for, and it just turned out to explode him into the public consciousness.
Steve Bannon got 4 months.
Yeah, exactly. And Bannon is linked to all these far right movements. So
Of course.
another parallel is sort of failure of elites, great economic privation. There was enormous unemployment as a result of the Great Depression. During the 20s, there was massive inflation. My grandmother writes about pushing shopping carts filled with German marks in order to buy bread. So they went from enormous inflation to enormous job loss. And so there was enormous economic anxiety, as we would say today. And so this sense of a crisis of legitimacy, where the options really were fascism or socialism, as they so often are. Very often there is this problematic side of liberation, which takes the form of fascism. We're going to smash the system. We're going to appoint the sort of key to the, Hannah Arendt says, when she's talking about the fascist leader, she says, he's vulgar. And the reason he's vulgar is because, it's a thumb in the eye of the elite. People vote for him because it's a thumb in the eye of the elite. They know that if they elect a house painter as Chancellor of Germany, it will so annoy the elite in Berlin who have to bow and scrape to a humble house painter. So that vulgarity, the promise of the promise of having the elite squirm is worth, having your entire family wiped out in a world war.
In this particular scenario we are in right now, we actually have our elites, such as Elon Musk, who are already kowtowing to Putin. So,
So it's very important to disaggregate the concept of elite. When fascism wins, it does so by co-opting the business elite. So fascism's ire is not directed against the business elite, unless you take banks, because they represent Jews, will often be targeted. So finance, capital. But fascism cannot win without the business elite. But all theories of elites disaggregate the concept of elite. There's the cultural elite, there's the media elite, there's the business elite, there's the intellectual elite. Fascism allies with the business elite against the cultural and intellectual elite.
That is just phenomenal. Thank you so much. Because we're always like, why is this happening over here? Why is this happening? Why isn't the media doing anything? And to take it apart like that is going to be a super helpful framework. We just spent a weekend where the entire community was flyered with anti-Semitic flyers, banners, everything that I'm from. My family is German as well, from Germany. Everything that I know and I've studied, I'm watching happen in Los Angeles in 2022, and I realize that there are, there's a playbook, but I want to combat it. Like, what do we do? What do we do when there's a flyer that is something that could come right out of the 30s in Germany? How do we fight that?
Well, the first issue you raise is solidarity. Without solidarity, we're kind of lost. So the left needs solidarity. So in the face of fascism, and this is a complaint about the fascism talk, to some extent legitimate, you have to say, all right, some of the agenda of the left is not going to be carried because we have to save the country from fascism. So if you want to save democracy, we're going to have to bring in, it's going to have to be a broad coalition. You're going to have to draw on the business elite. You're going to have to explain to the business elite, fascism isn't good for you. Like, fascism is not a good business environment because it's just about the loyalists. And are you sure you're not going to have a business that the leader and his party are going to covet? Because from what we see in a country like Hungary, if Orban's friends want your property, the courts will start going after you. It's obviously much, much worse in Russia. It's fascism, the system of loyalty. But to get people behind a message that includes some business elites, obviously that's difficult for the left, for some parts of the left, because obviously the union, labor movement is essential in fighting fascism. We also have to shore things up there. We have to make sure that the labor movement, everybody in the labor movement knows they're coming for you. Like, look who Trump put in charge of as Secretary of Labor. Like, this is not; these are your enemies. These are the enemies of labor. So this is the fascism is I'd go back to Plato and say fascism is even bad for the fascists, but the tyranny is bad even for the tyrant. Plato argues tyranny is hardest on the tyrant. So obviously going in for this kind of how do we fight it? I think we try to explain that just because owning the libs should not be a full politics. Like let's have a society in which Lenin once said fascism is when the policeman is paid more than the teacher. Well, by that measure, so let's reorient society so that we don't deal with our problems in this sort of, every social problem with militarized police. That's good for everybody. White men in America have 2 to 3 times the incarceration rate of any European country. So, mass incarceration is not good for white people either. It's good for nobody. The way we're living is good for nobody. So communicating that the politics that that these fascist parties double down on, which is law and order politics, police, harsh reprisals, spending everything on defense, destroying the environment. This is good for nobody, and it shouldn't really be worth it just to watch your people you hate squirm.
Brilliant.
How do you see any parallels in historically with what we're facing right now that don't end in a Holocaust? Right. I mean, the way World War II finally ended is that when people really saw what the result of their own behavior created, the world had a reaction, and we barely escaped. Right. Are there parallels in history where people have gotten out of the situation where there wasn't a Holocaust to snap them out of it?
Yeah, I mean, what we face is tyranny, is some kind of corrupt one-party autocracy, which will continue sort of a low-grade mass, crime against humanity. With almost 10% of the world in 2015, almost 10% of the world's prison population was Black American, 38 million people. So that low-grade human atrocity, which I blame on both parties, will continue and worsen, I would expect, with our massive prison system that incarcerates 25% of the world's prisoners, setting aside China's Uyghur Muslim genocide. So what I would predict is a worsening of the fascist elements of U.S. society. Toni Morrison said the United States prefers fascist solutions to its national problems, and so mass incarcerating your minority population rather than providing good, eliminating locally funded schools to create good schools, to create jobs, to create, so notice that when Trump went into white working class places, he didn't say, "I'm going to teach you how to act white and wear a suit and be a businessman." No, he said, "I'm going to bring back manufacturing jobs so you can be you." So think of the difference with black majority Black areas. We're going to teach you how to act white. So I would expect a dramatic worsening of that. resulting in mass political protest by Black Americans, which is, after all, an ongoing, simmering revolution against incarceration, against the reality of mass incarceration. In fact, an ever worsening of that. So an ever more brutal cracking down on on Black population as a kind of sign of, as a sort of political machismo. I would expect sort of random acts of brutality internationally.
Well, DeSantis just arrested a bunch of Black people for voter fraud, right?
Right. A straightforward,
right?
right. What we'd be returning to is kind of Jim Crow-ish thing. That is the America that we're supposed to be returning to. It's the Jim Crow era or something like it. The Southern states have never been full democracies, even after civil rights. They used mass incarceration. There's 1 million people who've been convicted of felonies who cannot vote in Florida. There's no other country in the world that does that. No other democratic country in the world says that people freed from prison lose the right to vote permanently. There's 1 million people in Florida. Florida would vote Democratic every single election. So these are not democracies. And DeSantis's move was an authoritarian move to terrify Black voters. So now, I wouldn't vote. It's terrifying. And we've allowed this to slide. We've allowed people to be in prison for long periods of time for voting when they, no country should allow. The big issue is, should people in prison vote? In most countries, people in prison vote.
Wow.
But that's not even on the table here. We're talking about people out of prison in a country that imprisons almost the same percentage as the Soviet Union did during the height of the Gulag.
Oh my God.
7 times more than the average European country, 6 to 7 times more than the average European country. So when we look at that, so I would expect a reversion to the time in America that most influenced European fascism, the kind of and the model of Southern states extending federally, where in the Southern states the Republican Party wins all the time, and when the Democratic Party was racist, they won all the time. And a sort of creaking, corrupt, anti-labor, juiced up billionaire with connections to power. I'd expect more of that.
And so,
sort of Latin American autocracy.
Thank you for that, because of course, what happens to the dissidents in an environment like that? That's
Right.
something that we ask ourselves. It's very important in the few minutes we have left. There's a couple things I want to bring up, but you wrote a letter to the January 6th committee, which I read late last night, where you said January 6th, a statement. January 6th represents a warning sign for the entire world. January 6th was a beginning, not an end. Failure to provide accountability for those who initiated it is tantamount to legitimizing it, as well as the slow motion coup to which it has given birth. Can you just speak on that? Because it's so important.
Yeah, either we're a rule of law country or we're not. And fascist rule of law is just about means that the fascist leader is by his nature lawful, and opposition is criminal, and the minority groups are by their nature criminal, and anything they do is legitimate. So they try to overthrow the democracy of the United States. You'll find these false equivalences, and the Republicans are like, oh, Black Lives Matter involved violence. Now that was massively exaggerated. Violence has been much studied. However, so it didn't. There actually is not really a parallel. There is no parallel. But also, it's a completely false equivalence, because the point of Black Lives Matter was to stop police brutality. The point of the January 6th coup was to overthrow United States democracy. Those are vastly different goals. It's like saying, oh, the U.S. Army in World War II was violent. Yeah, they were violent because they were trying to overthrow fascism. They were trying to defeat Hitler. That's why they were violent. But if you're trying to overthrow U.S. democracy, that's illegitimate. And if you don't punish that, answer to that. You must punish the attempt to overthrow U.S. democracy. I'm fine with letting all the minor actors go relatively unpunished or unpunished. But Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, these are the leaders that tried to overthrow U.S. democracy. Donald Trump.
Mike Flynn.
Well, Michael Flynn, who is leading a true fascist, violent fascist movement right now. And is
Eric Prince says what? Sorry.
Right, Eric Prince, right. Sort of the
Dark Lord. Yeah.
Right.
The visible ones.
The Michigan Midwest billionaires who have been behind a lot.
Amway, DeVos, it's very, very dark stuff for sure.
Yeah.
So I know we only have like a minute left, and we do.
I get one final question.
Hold that. Okay, you go ahead and ask yours, and then I'm going to get a summation. Go ahead, Hi-Fi.
Okay, so here's my problem. We were discussing Poland, and it's the Law and Justice Party, right? How do you pronounce that? Would you say that Poland is currently drowning in peace? Sorry. I had to.
Okay.
Poland faces a far right government that replaced its judiciary by loyalists, by lowering the mandatory retirement age. But as one journalist said to me, and this is kind of funny in the American context when our conservatives are all over Hungary. One center-right journalist said to me, "Look, if this were Hungary, no journalists would be talking to you." So, in other words, they're saying, we're not fascist, Hungary is.
Not us, it's them.
Oh my gosh.
So, because what Orban did is he went after every opposition media, forced them to sell themselves to friends of his using the courts. So you might see more of that here to answer Jim's earlier question of what to expect. I don't expect a Holocaust. I expect, grinding U.S. brutality and injustice, but amplified and continued, perhaps not as bad as Jim Crow, but certainly an amplification and overt. Mississippi is 38% black population. How much political power do they have? So I'd expect just more of that. But I don't expect anything like Hitler's Holocaust. Hitler was genuinely unique psychopath. But yeah, Poland faces, there are these gradations, and Poland, it's tough on women, very difficult on LGBT. The opposition process held for now. But once you grab the courts, and the Republican Party has grabbed the courts, things go downhill very quickly.
Thank you for that.
Serious question though, and thank you for giving a serious answer to my bullshit question. But serious question is, how much do you see technology enabling the rise of fascism, specifically with like NSO, Pegasus, spyware, things like that?
I would ask someone whose name is High Five that question.
So here's
no leading a witness. All right, fair enough.
I'm going to go back to your sweet spot because you are writing a book about language. I think there's probably never been a time in my lifetime where independent investigative journalism has been more relevant, and the erosion of truth has needed more people defending it. And can we just leave on what your expertise is on the importance of language and the critical weaponization of it that we're seeing?
It's kind of a curious time for scholars like me who work on rhetoric, because we're seeing the worst kind of rhetoric. We're seeing great replacement theory, which is at the heart of mass violence, much mass violence being kind of normalized is too little almost at this point. It's being championed. It's yes. At the heart of things. And so we see in all of the stochastic terrorism, we see the results of this, from Anders Breivik to the Buffalo Peyton to the Buffalo shoot killer. Buffalo Killer had a whole section on great replacement theory and talked about critical race theory and the whole 9 yards. As so all of this, we're seeing all of this when there are these mass killings. You see it there. But what we have to fear, and this was Jim's worry, is the is state-sanctioned mass violence. We saw some state-sanctioned mass violence against immigrants, of course, and that will probably return, unfortunately, and that was a continuing theme, but it worsened. I think that, but the rhetoric is like pre-genocidal. It's like if you look at what Putin said about Ukraine as a justification for the invasion, like their existential threats, they'll kill us. I mean, that's exactly what the Republican Party has been saying about Mexican immigration and South and Central American immigration for years now. So there's this worry. There's always years between the rhetoric, the violent rhetoric justifying mass violence, and the mass violence, state-sanctioned mass violence. And we already have the largest prison system in the world. So I'm worried the rhetoric of the rhetoric that, say, Michael Flynn uses, that the Democratic Party are communists and seeking a communist takeover, that sort of thing is very dangerous. I mean, if the Democratic Party were seeking an authoritarian, totalitarian, communist takeover, so people are like, oh, Professor Stanley, but you're saying MAGA is fascist. Yes, but that's true.
Yeah,
no communists.
in Germany, they blamed the liberals, the communists, and the Jews, right?
Yeah.
Starting from 1919, they pushed that, and it took 20 years, but it ended up in exactly as you said, in state-sponsored mass violence.
That's the pattern we're seeing here. But I would expect it to be directed against the next outburst of Black political protest, which they will attempt to create by making policing even more violent.
So we'd like to end on something hopeful, which is difficult because we're 2 weeks away from an election that, we see that voter turnout looks amazing, but we also know that there's been a lot in place to create, I think, some kind of havoc. But you mentioned solidarity already. Is there one or two other things you can leave us with that is critical as we stop autocratic capture in its tracks?
Vote. Explain to people what the stakes are. Maybe the last election where your vote matters.
Thank you.
Vote.
Thank you, Jason Stanley.
Honored to have you here, Jason. Thank you so much.
So grateful. That's a bucket list right there. So
The man knows what he's talking about.
he does.
People, listen to Jason Stanley. Yeah. If you don't want to listen to us, listen to Jason Stanley.
And if you don't want to listen to Jason, listen to David Pepper. You don't want to listen to David Pepper, listen to Brianna Wu. You don't want to listen to Brianna Wu, listen to Nancy McLean. I mean, our guests.
Paul Mason.
Paul Mason. Oh my God.
Tomas Ilves.
Oh.
Johnson. I mean, what do you got to do? How much more do we have to show you people?
We're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep doing it. And we're going to keep doing it after November 8th, come what may. Why don't we do something beautiful and let Toni Morrison take us out?
Authoritarian reigns, dictators, despots are often, but not always, fools. But none is foolish enough to give perceptive, dissident writers free range to publish their judgments or to follow their creative instincts. They know they do so at their peril. They're not stupid enough to abandon control, overt or insidious, over media. Their methods include surveillance, censorship, arrest, even slaughter of writers and journalists informing and disturbing the public, of writers unsettling, calling into question, taking another, deeper look. Writers, journalists, essayists, bloggers, poets, playwrights, these people disturb the social oppression that functions like coma on a population, a coma that the despots call peace. These writers staunch the blood flow of war that hawks and profiteers thrill to, and that is the peril to these regimes.